I want to thank you all for coming here today, and particularly thank our guests who are behind me, including Assemblyman Al Sturpey and Senator Valesky and Senator DeFrancisco, as well as members of the building trades and Supervisor for the town of Cazenovia, Tim Hunt, Ed Theobald from the town of Manlius, and Dick Donovan and Mac Murray. So you can see here that infrastructure really has built great coalitions. As many of you know, roughly about a week ago, I introduced my plan called the Syracuse Billion Plan, which was focused exclusively on infrastructure. What I said in that plan and continue to believe is when you look at the history of the city of Syracuse, what has positioned us for growth has been investment in infrastructure. And when we stopped investing in infrastructure, unfortunately, you started to see us sputter in terms of our economic growth. We have a proud tradition of investing in infrastructure, starting, of course, with the Erie Canal, going to a fantastic water main system that is over 100 years old, and roads and bridges and communication systems with traffic signals that talk to each other. Unfortunately, those have reached the end of a lot of their usable life, and they need to be reinvested in. And reinvesting in that infrastructure will position us for growth for the entire community, and that's why I've been committed as a mayor of this city to talk about how important infrastructure is and to talk about how important it is for our future. And I am pleased to be joined today by a number of people who believe the same thing. So without further ado, let me introduce the Master of Ceremonies, Carly Hill from Union Concrete and Rebuild New York Now, who will lead us through the program.
Thank you, Mayor. And I do want to just express that a big part of what this is about dedication and passion for growth and sustainability, as the Mayor so eloquently pointed out, that very many people within our industry, it's not a short-term investment. If you're into infrastructure, roads, bridges, which from my background, I grew up, I'm the third generation of family that is dedicated to this industry. It's something that you don't think twice about, and you know more than most people when it comes to the conditions and just what it takes to maintain that kind of a program. Most people don't think of infrastructure as a program, but it is something that needs continuous work and oversight and investment, and not to mention the available workforce and equipment needs to be able to be fulfilled and maintained year after year. And I think that Rebuild New York Now is out here, and we're trying to get this message to everybody that your roads and bridges, your sewer systems, your waterways, New York State is one of the greatest states in the country, but a lot of these places and buildings and structures were put together all at the same time, different points. They have a lifetime. They have a lifespan. And if you don't invest in them, they start to do what anything else does that you don't invest in or you don't take care of. They start to break down. And so this is about pointing that out to everybody and letting you know that backbone that you depend on day in and day out, night, morning, to get wherever it is you have to go, that backbone needs alignment. And everybody who's come here today has a different point to make about just why this infrastructure investment is so needed right now, whether you're in charge of the town roads or if you're maintaining the labor force that comes out to do that work, or if you're out there hearing the public's opinion as to just what it is that they want to see in their communities. Everyone's here to kind of present that today. And I don't want to take this too much time out of you, but I'd like to introduce the first speaker to kind of give you a little bit of an idea as to what Rebuild New York Now is about and just why it's so needed all across the state, that everyone band together and understand that now is the time. There is no other time. Now is the time to take this investment. It's been long overdue. There's many bridges that once you get out there, once you're on those roads, they're in far worse condition than we even anticipated. So this isn't something to take lightly. This is something to take on and to take on now. And so first I'd like to introduce John DeFrancisco from the Senate Finance Committee.
That's Chairman of the Finance Committee.
Thank you.
Thank you for putting this together. This is really, really important because when money comes into the state of New York, there is a feeding frenzy that you can't imagine. I see it all the time. The question is, when you get a windfall, and it's a one-shot windfall, what do you do with that money? You've got to use it for things that can be done in a one-shot way. Orrin McMurray, retired from CNS, is behind me, he'll be speaking. He's been talking to me about infrastructure for at least 15 years, and this is the answer we would always get as far as trying to divvy up the money. Well, we're near our bonding limit, we can't bond. We need money for the schools, we need money for this, we need money for that. It's all true. But most of those areas that I just mentioned are reoccurring expenses. You can't raise school aid, and then the next year you don't have the windfall. Then you got to make cuts. This is a perfect opportunity. And as was just mentioned, we can't miss this opportunity. And the minute I heard of the $6 billion or so of surplus from lawsuit revenues, the minute it happened, I said we have to use it exclusively for infrastructure. Not only state roads and bridges, but the municipalities and the cities and towns and villages who are represented here have to participate as well. They're in probably worse shape than the state government. So with that said, as Chairman of Finance, it's very, very important to keep your voices loud and clear so that when the feeding frenzy begins, the right thing is done, and I'll do my darndest to make that happen. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce State Senator Dave Valesky.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here and participate in the Rebuild New York effort. I want to again publicly commend Mayor Miner for putting forth and putting on paper a real plan to address the city of Syracuse's urgent needs when it comes to infrastructure. She's been talking about it for as long as she's been mayor. Now that there are resources at the state level to help, we have a plan to go forward. But it's not only the city of Syracuse. As you heard earlier, the other local government elected officials who are here have tremendous needs as it relates to infrastructure as well. My conference, the Independent Democratic Conference in the State Senate, as you may have heard earlier this week, put out a plan to invest the entire windfall, some $5 billion windfall, for infrastructure needs. And I really feel confident that continuing to work closely with Chairman DeFrancisco in the Senate over the next several weeks and months, that the Senate and I think the legislature in general will be focusing, and the governor as well, like a laser on the infrastructure needs all across New York State, and that either before or as a component of the new state budget process, this will be the most significant issue, or one of the most significant issues that we deal with, and I think it will be dealt with in some fashion. We're certainly going to work together from a local perspective to do everything we can to make it happen here locally. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce Assemblyman Al Sturpey. I'm going to raise the microphone for you.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Mayor Miner for holding this. And, you know, New York State was an amazing place 100, 150 years ago. It was the place everybody looked to. And we did great things. We built infrastructure before anybody else did. But now, you know, that infrastructure is very old. It's time to do something new. And if you think people are complaining about infrastructure because once in a while, you know, a pipe breaks in the street and you see water flowing, wait until they turn their faucets on and it doesn't work, or they flush their toilets and that doesn't work. So, you know, as we talk about what we're going to do in Albany, I have not heard anybody from our conference talk about anything other than infrastructure when it comes to the windfall. So I think it's safe to say that we are all focused on this one issue. And while the state may have $50 billion worth of infrastructure needs, this $5 or $6 billion that we have today will go a long way to making, you know, the most urgent repairs we need to make. So with that, I just think that we are on our way, and I think good things are going to happen pretty soon. So thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Next, I'd like to introduce From the Laborers Local 633, Gabe Rossetti III.
Good morning, everybody. I appreciate everybody coming out for this very important conference that has to do with infrastructure. Many of you may have come in contact with certain projects wherever you may have been, whether it be on a bridge, at one-lane road that slows your morning commute down, or seeing the city of Syracuse fixing some potholes out there. Whatever it may be, those projects that you may have incurred, have seen, they're just temporary fixes, most of them. Band-aids, to say the least. We need a more comprehensive fix that's going to last for our children, to make our lives safe. We've had many projects that are just temporary, whether it be fixing some bridges out here and many of you see these bridges right through the city of Syracuse crumbling. For people that live here, see these bridges day in, day out, we use them to commute back and forth. Those bridges are, even though they have been repaired to a certain extent, they still are in disarray. They still, year after year, fall apart. We've seen that last year with a bridge being under construction. Piece of the bridge fell below, on the street below, and those type of things should not occur in this time, this age. People should not have their families in jeopardy just commuting back and forth to work or going to have dinner. This needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed now. And there's no better opportunity than with the windfall that we have, the state has. And with that, thank you.
Some excellent points, Gabe. Thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce from the United Brotherhood of Carpenters, Jeff Murray.
Morning, everyone. I'd also like to thank the mayor and the coalition for inviting me to speak here today. I'd like to reiterate a statement made earlier by Senator DeFrancisco. This is a no-brainer. For this area and for all of New York State to be state-of-the-art, it's all based on infrastructure. For our schools to be the best, we have to have the best communication lines, the best roads, the best ports, the best highways. For our business to thrive in this state, they have to have the means to get their product in and out. It's a no-brainer, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce the supervisor from the town of Cazenovia, also an executive committee member, and now NYSAOTSOH, which is for local town concerns, and I read up on this. It's an interesting organization. Mr. Tim Hunt.
My name is Tim Hunt. I'm the highway superintendent in the town of Cazenovia. I'm also an executive committee member for the New York State Association of Town Highway Superintendents. Our membership is responsible for 86% of the roads in New York State and half the bridges in New York State. We're the largest transportation association of highway superintendents. We represent 932 highway superintendents in New York State right now. The highway system owned by the 1,600 local governments in New York State consists of 97,000 center line miles of roadway and 8,600 bridges. 46% of your daily traffic travels on town and local roads. In 2013, our association commissioned a study to calculate the local pavement and bridge needs in New York State. They estimated in the next 15 years we need $34.8 billion to maintain our local infrastructure. The comptroller's office also looked at what we are currently spending, and it's approximately $1 billion a year, or $15 billion over the same period of time, which gives us a shortfall in that $15 15-year period of $19.79 billion, or $1.3 billion a year shortfall just to maintain our existing roads and bridges. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to highlight the importance of this very critical need to our economy. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce the Town of Manlius Supervisor, Edmund Theobald.
Hold your applause. Thank you. When I was first contacted by Association of Towns, asked if I would be here at a press conference this morning regarding the $5 billion revenue that windfall, I guess you could call it, through the banking industry and the lawsuits that developed here. The first thing I did was reach out to the experts, and that is my highway superintendent, Rob Cushing, and his staff. And so what I'd like to do is bring it a little bit to the local level of what we have to deal with in the town on a budgetary basis, as well as our future concerns with regard to our infrastructure and infrastructure needs and the lack of funding as well. The town of Manlius maintains 109 plus miles of road, which includes another 11 miles that we plow for Onondaga County. Our estimated cost of material only to pave 1 mile of road is roughly $222,000. That's not including cost of labor, trucks, paver, roller, fuel, maintenance, that type of thing. It's our general road summer budget for hiring contractors and purchasing asphalt is over $991,000. At the cost of $222,000 a mile, this means that the town can roughly rebuild 4.45 miles of road a year. 109 miles of road to maintain. It will take over 24 years to rebuild each road mile in our town. New York State currently recommends that a 12-year rebuild schedule, so the town of Manlius budget is approximately half of where it needs to be to keep our roads well maintained. So any additional funds from the billion of unexpected revenue would have an important positive impact on our annual road infrastructure improvement plan. In addition, it's not just the roads. We deal with drainage issues as well. Our highway department estimates that more than 2/3 of the calls to them are concerns that pertain to water and drainage. The town's budget for drainage problems has been around $40,000 per year. While the $40,000 budget is enough to cover the typical yearly maintenance of various drainage issues, it is nowhere near enough to rebuild these sections with deteriorating pipes. So as you can see, we have a real local concern, and we really hope that everyone looks at this and spends this money wisely in the area which is mostly needed, and that is in our infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we're hearing a lot of points. There's a lot of people who spend a lot of time looking into this. We know how to manage this type of issues and how to mitigate problems as they come up, but also that if this windfall can come in our direction, it can hit the ground running, and it's something that everyone's going to look to as they move through the state. Every single member of our state is going to notice how well we've invested in the infrastructure that allows the people to get to where they need to go. And you've got a whole fleet of people here testifying to just where they can put that and how they can use it as soon as they can get it. Next, I'd like to introduce Dick Donovan, the mayor from the village of Minoa, to talk again.
Thank you. First of all, I appreciate Mayor Miner bringing us all together today, our Central New York champion of local government. Last year I was president of NICOM, the New York Conference of Mayors. And I can tell you, traveling this state, it's a concern, all of our infrastructure. And what I said in my press release is, it's not pretty. You can't see the water lines, you can't see the sewer lines. But what happens if they don't function? It's a problem. It's a serious problem. And we have to deal with it, as the good Senator DeFrancisco said, we have to deal with it and deal with it now. I also said in my release, $5 billion is a start. You've already heard some of the numbers. They're incredible. We need that money to go to infrastructure at all levels of government. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce Orrin McMurray from CNS Companies.
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor, for pulling us together, and I want to thank all the speakers that are here today. Being the last speaker, my message to you is very simple. It's time to act. We need to act now. You've heard that in our own community, we have hundreds of water main breaks on average a year right here in our city. That means people don't have water to drink. In our county, we have hundreds of bridges that are deficient and need significant attention. That means that bridges can be closed. Those are bridges that our school buses go over. Those are bridges that our fire departments depend on to get to an emergency situation. The time to act is now. You know, there's an old saying in business, you need to invest money to make money. Well, a corporation invests money in order to improve its productivity. And I would suggest that in government, we invest money to improve our productivity as a society, but also to protect the public health, welfare, and safety of our citizens. Infrastructure is a real issue in our communities, in our states, and in our nation. And the time to act is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mac. So I think you've seen that infrastructure pulls a broad coalition of different advocates together. We are really fortunate to be in Syracuse, which is in the home of so much infrastructure that was transformational, not just for Syracuse, not just for the state, but for our entire country. And we have an opportunity here with the settlement windfall to make a real investment to bring us back to really being competitive again and using that foundation to allow everyone to win from this. So with that, I would like to invite the elected officials up to the podium with me, and I'd be happy to entertain questions that anybody has.
We talk about $5 billion potentially for the state. How do you possibly divvy that in a way that everybody considers fair and yet actually has an impact?
Well, that's one thing I forgot to mention. The concern I would have with the Tappan Zee Bridge going up, and still no plan as to how it's going to be paid for, that there'd be a great temptation to use most of the money for that. I'm going to do everything I can, and I've said this consistently, it's got to be regionally balanced, and it's got to be, whether it's by population, proportion, whether it's requiring each municipality to submit what their needs are, but the needs are going to be much more than we can afford. So it's got to be regionally balanced, and that's among the state needs as well as the municipal needs, upstate, downstate.
Does the state have a figure of how much is needed statewide?
You hear all kinds of figures. All I know that we need a hell of a lot more than the $5 to $6 billion. So it's not going to be difficult to find enough needs to use this money. It's going to be more difficult to do the next step because we'll have to bond for the next step. So let's do the wise thing now. Use this one-shot money to do what we should have done years ago.
What's the long-term answer? We hear over and over that there's no ongoing revenue stream to pay for infrastructure. How do we get to the point where we don't have these?
Well, there's also this year where we should be, and this is another part of our budget negotiations, we should be approving a five-year plan for the Department of Transportation, a five-year plan that we used to do all the time that's regionally balanced, upstate and downstate. Last few years, it's been 1 to 3 years that nobody can plan anything. It's not only the money's not there, but who's next, because we don't know what the money's going to be. So if we do what we've done in the past, rather than the history over the last few years, we should additionally have a 5-year infrastructure plan or for the Department of Transportation, Metropolitan Transportation Association downstate, that authority downstate That's what should have been done in the immediate past, and it should be, continue to be done in the future.
Mayor, do you have a figure on how much the city would save if its infrastructure needs were met? In other words, you spend money each year unexpectedly on water main breaks, paving, and city streets. Do you have a figure on what the savings are from improving the infrastructure and whether they balance out maybe borrowing money?
Well, the answer is we have a 10-year plan, 10-year capital plan that we use for infrastructure. And we can't go outside of that to do any more than we already are. We are very fiscally responsible. It's recognized by the bond houses, the underwriters who have increased our bond rating. But inherent in your question are so many assumptions. What do you define as infrastructure? What do you define as being, in a ready state of maintenance? And how do you move forward? And with all of these, these sort of extreme weather events that are now beginning to be regular, are you starting to think about how that impacts your infrastructure? And how do you take a 100-year-old infrastructure and make it resilient and sustainable? Part of what I think the opportunity here is, and obviously there's not enough money for all of the needs across the state, but part of this is a real engineering challenge to say to the best and brightest among us, we have a fraction of what we need, but tell us how we can be resilient and jumpstart the 21st century with the infrastructure that we have and using the money that we have to move forward.
Give a refresher on where that $5 to $6 billion you're talking about, where it came from again.
It was the Attorney General in the state of New York settlement monies from what I would call the bad actors in the financial crisis and some of the bad acts that they committed. Rather than going into litigation, they went into settlement and paid these amounts.
So from a political point of view, I guess, who's on the other side? I mean, is it the schools that are going to be buying? Who's going after this money? Because the governor seems to be supporting infrastructure, right? Or how do you make this sexy?
Who is not looking for it is probably the easiest question, because we've been asked to provide more money for the schools, for sure. That's going to be a big group. There's various organizations that get, say, long-term care, that get reimbursement from the state. The reimbursement's been inadequate for years. Now they say, okay, now's the time. We've got that opportunity. So every organization that has ever looked for money for something is going to be there. But the key difference is that it's a one-shot deal. We made mistakes trying to make these people happy, as maybe they should be. But this is not going to be around next year. And a cut next year isn't going to help them by some kind of raise this year. So that's why the infrastructure should be a priority for everybody.
What do you think? If you could give it a percentage, what do you think? 50-50?
My percent is probably 70% chance of, no, 70% chance of infrastructure getting the lion's share of it, but there's going to be someone at the trough who's also going to get some of the money. And my argument, that's just bad, because it's going to put us in a hole for that 30% next year. But that's what happens when you got to compromise from time to time. That's my guess. Hope we can make it 100% for the infrastructure. And still provide for the needs, because the budget is in a surplus situation, even without this money. Surplus. In the past, we were $10 billion in deficit at one point, but each year that deficit has been cut back by prudent, I think, financial decisions by the governor and by the legislature. So there's still surpluses in the revenues that come in each year. That should be what should be used for these other things.
Would you also argue that not investing in infrastructure could end up costing more to the state in the long run?
Yeah, you either pay now or you pay later, and that's the problem. We haven't been paying now for so long, we're paying more later. And if we're trying to talk economic development, what company is going to come into a state where they can't get from point A to point B and they're having a water break every 6 weeks? I mean, it's part of not only the quality of life, but part of what's got to be provided to draw companies into the state. And that won't only be done by commercials all over the state saying we're not going to charge you taxes. It's got to be what they see when they get here.
What does this money mean for the Interstate 81 projects? Are there any updates on that?
We don't. That's still in the middle of a federal project, and our anticipation is that a large share of this money will be federal money. So this is sort of They're on parallel tracks.
Mayor, there was another the water main break this morning again. There's been a lot of significant ones. Is that for the city kind of a concern?
Oh,
too,
it's,
that-
you know, I said, I think I started ringing the bell last year on December 26th about the pressure that our infrastructure, particularly our water mains, were under. We've had unprecedented number of water main breaks. And back to your earlier question about is it more expensive? It is now because we're paying for workers to go in and fix those as they happen, as opposed to planning and being more strategic about it. The only reason that hasn't been more of a hue and cry about it is because our water main workers and our water department are so good and so quick at doing this that we have a hard and fast rule that nobody's going to be without water for more than 24 hours. Most oftentimes it's much less than that. But these are significant interruptions that I think year to date we're up over 360 water main breaks. And, you know, 3 or 4 years ago it was a fraction of that, and it would only happen in the winter. They're happening consistently across the board now.
Mayor, can I get something?
Sure.
The question was raised about what's the answer long-term, and does it cost more to fix it than it does to adequately invest on an ongoing basis? It's kind of like painting your house. If you paint your house regularly, you don't have to replace the siding every 10 or 15 or 20 years. If you don't paint your house, the siding may go bad, and you've got a much bigger ticket item to deal with. And we've been doing that with our infrastructure. We use highways and bridges for an example. The gas tax in the United States has been 18.4 cents per gallon for over 20 years. The average citizen that drives about 15,000 miles a year pays between $25 and $30 a month. That's a month. In all of their New York State and federal highway and gas taxes. You know, we do need to address long-term adequate investment in painting the house so that we don't, every 10 or 15 or 20 years, have to rebuild the house.
Which would come from raising the taxes.
Arguably, on the federal level, it could come from a number of areas. One option, one alternative would be to raise the 18.4 cent gas tax. That would be one option. But there are many other alternatives that have been proposed at the federal level that could include the increased use of public-private partnerships to engage financing from private equity community. There are opportunities to use innovative and creative technologies that we don't use currently today in order to address some of these problems. As an engineer, as the mayor said, there are things that we can do and do better in the future. But regardless, we're not paying today the same for a loaf of bread that we paid 20 years ago. And as was emphasized earlier by one of our construction partners and professionals here, it doesn't cost the same thing today as it did 20 years ago to fix that bridge or that road or that water line. We have to be prepared as a society to adequately invest in infrastructure if we want that infrastructure to be there to provide the level of health, welfare, and safety that we want in our community.
What's the chance of the state gas tax increase?
Zero.
You know, you see rallies for a lot of these other things. Do you think you can get like a bunch of people out there saying, you know, fix my roads? I don't see it getting that kind of groundswell of, you know.
Look, this is what I think you're seeing here is a rally, and you're going to continue to see it across the state. Fundamentally, I think every citizen believes that it is a responsibility of government to make sure that our infrastructure works. And so what we are coming to the citizens and the government to say is we need resources, and the resources are there. And it makes sense from a fiscal standpoint, from a responsibility standpoint, to take one-shot revenues and invest them in capital. So we have the money, we clearly have the needs, let's do the right thing. All right, thank you all very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.